Good evening and welcome to our Committee for Collaborative Decision Making. It rolls off the tongue. Welcome to everyone. We have 6 CCGs around the table. 5 are currently quorate. We are waiting for 1 person from Richmond. Therefore, we will not make any decisions initially until we are quorate, but fortunately, we don't have to make any decisions straight away. Do we have apologies, Emma? No, none. Declarations of interest. All members have completed their register of interests, which are duly recorded. When we come to discussing the first paper number 2, and I invite speakers from the CCGs, it would be helpful if any GP wishing to speak would identify themselves as such, although it is recorded on the register. I have had no any other business brought to my attention. If anyone has some, could they mention it now so that I can time the meeting appropriately? None here. We've also had no written questions from members of the public. I will be taking questions at the end of our agenda, but only on matters relating to specific items on today's agenda. Right. So, on to paper 2, Lucy. Funding to deliver extended access and primary care at scale in 1819.
Thank you very much. Well, it's a real pleasure to come and present this to you today. It's becoming, for someone who's not a GP, my specialist subject. So the objective of this paper is to set out the background regarding what was known as extended access funding and how it's now being directed towards primary care transformation, which is the context of the decision that's being asked of the committee in common. The paper summarises the requirements for extended access and primary care transformation, or primary care at scale, as it's elsewhere called, and presents a recommendation for the funding in the next financial year. So the General Practice Forward View set out a requirement for primary care extended access, which has been delivered 8 till 8, 7 days a week across South West London. The paper references the amount of money that we had to do that originally and the way in which that money was apportioned across South West London. So it was based on business cases submitted by individual CCGs and did not reflect weighted population. It's really important to say the extended access story has been a tremendous success, both in South West London and across London. It's because CCGs, GPs, federations have been so successful at delivering a really high quality extended access service that we're now in the position to suggest using further extended access funding to deliver wider ambitions for our population. So CCGs need to complete the work on extended access, and we'll discuss that specification in a moment. But the potential that's described in this paper is to use the future money, known as extended access, to deliver the wider ambitions for primary care transformation or primary care at scale. So the next slide summarises what was in the original specification for extended access. I won't go through all of the detail, but I think it's important to note that every CCG delivers nearly all of this already. There are a small number of elements in each of the CCG areas that need to be completed, whether they're to do with IT solutions to do direct access booking, or whether they are about meeting the full 30 minutes of, per 1,000 population. Most of this is already being delivered in each CCG. The first ask of the money going into 1819 is that CCGs ensure, and that we as an STP assure, that the full specification is being met, and we have a process through what's called the Transforming Primary Care Delivery Group to ensure that that will take place. I'm happy to take any questions as we go through, but otherwise I'll just keep going. The next page starts to describe primary care transformation or primary care at scale. And I think it's important to note that these are new terms and have not previously been well defined. So the Healthy London Partnership programme has done a significant amount of work to describe in detail what is meant by primary care at scale, and therefore the transformation programme that we have to go through in order to achieve that in each of our areas. Now, there are, a very large number of documents with many pages that describe what primary care at scale looks like, and what we've summarised here is really very much just the bullet points, and is absolutely the ambition over a significant period of time. And that's that primary care will deliver comprehensive population-based care through primary care networks. And this very much aligns with the way that the STP has developed localities and has had a programme in place over several years, and is already in place in a number of CCGs. That there is a real focus on quality, on patient outcomes and continuous improvement across all practices. That there's a focus on primary care developing corporate functions. It has organisational capabilities operating across a number of practices and a population at scale. That there is effective governance and stewardship, and it cites here a few things: strategic direction, accountability, a culture based on NHS values, trust, understanding and management of risk and patient safety. And lastly, has a significant leadership capacity. So it can build collaborative system partnerships and really be a driver of system leadership within each CCG area. So within South West London, as I referenced earlier, there is something called the Transforming Primary Care Delivery Group. We have a clinical lead, Dr. Nicola Jones, who's sitting in the corner, Wandsworth CCG chair. I'm the SRO for South West London. Attending that meeting on a monthly basis are all of your CCG primary care leads, the NHS England contracting team, a small South West London transformation team reflected in the audience, and increasingly we're looking for clinical leads in each of the CCGs to join that group too. So we have been working through, as this vision has evolved over the last few months, what this means, what the granularity is, the detail that sits behind these headlines, what that scale of ambition looks like compared to our starting point, because it is a significant level of ambition and everyone's in different places, and even within CCGs there are different locations who have different levels of maturity against this framework. But started to understand, working with each individual CCG, what it means and how it is that we would start to make progress against this framework. But of course significantly important in order to start making progress is some funding, because this is a really a huge ask compared to our starting point for primary care. So South West London's funding in 1819 to deliver extended access and transformation is £8 million, and that funding comes directly to the STP. So there has been an extensive process within London for identifying how the money that is available, how the money should be used, and how it is allocated across London. In fact, I've literally come here out of the London-wide meeting where the process was yet again gone through and confirmed. Each STP does have flexibility in using that money, provided we cover all the asks. So we finish the extended access specification and we deliver the assurance that we have to date around the progress and compliance with that specification. That we make real progress against the ambition of at scale. And there is a maturity framework that we will be going through as an STP delivery group that starts to self-assess where are we now, where do we want to be, and how can we use the 18-19 funding to start making progress on that ambition. It's absolutely key to the London team, and in the assurance we will be asked to give, that this is a build, not a substitution of funding. So the London team want absolute assurance that this is not putting money into the system in order to see it disappear off with another hand. It is there will be a significant process of showing how we have used our previous primary care funding to deliver a certain level of ambition, and that the new funding makes real steps further. And we will be expected to develop and present the plans which needs to be coherent, ambitious, and also owned within CCGs. So as much as this is a high-level framework that has been developed nationally, really extended in London, it is also critical that this is bottom-up and is owned by individual practices and localities as you get to a CCG position and then aggregate that to the STP. The STP will be expected to present this to the London team, and we now have 2 dates in May, in fact. So the proposed split of funding is on the next page. There were 3 principles, or 2 principles. At the starting point, the CCGs received the same funding that they received in 17-18, which, as I said before, was on the basis of business cases, so it was different to weighted capitation. But the additional funding is split across CCGs to level up the pounds per head funding so that there is equity across South West London. And the table below shows what that means for each CCG. So in summary, this committee in common is asked to approve the approach that we have taken, meaning that all CCGs will receive £5.41 per head funding in 18-19. That we continue, as the South West London Transforming Primary Care Delivery Group, to work with individual CCGs and local governance to oversee development of local plans, and that we work through what is going to be a London-wide assurance programme to ensure that we present those coherent, ambitious and owned plans, that we ensure that the delivery vehicles, the delivery and implementation plans are in place, so that we not just get the first tranche of money that will be given from those May meetings, but also provide that assurance to London that we continue to get the funding through 18-19, and that we will use our governance, the Transforming Primary Care Delivery Group, not just to monitor the progress and delivery this year, but to try and accelerate primary care transformation to get maximum advantage from further funding that we expect to see in 19-20.
Thank you, Lucy. Now, I propose to take comments and questions from the CCG delegations first. Then I'll ask the Public and Health Watch representatives for comments, and then we will take a vote. So, any questions to start off? Comments? Stephen.
One question and one suggestion. The question is, right at the end, you touched on future years, and I'd be helpful if you could just say a little bit more about what the current expectations are. Is this a one-off, or is it seen as some sort of ongoing commitment? That was the question. My comment was that we felt very comfortable when we discussed this in our CCG of the proposals and the recommendations, but it would be helpful just to have confirmation that, as well as the monitoring and reporting, which obviously will happen in your steering group, there will be regular reporting also to individual CCGs on progress and issues and involvement of CCG level as well.
So on the question of the funding, we have had assurance from London Region that this is recurrent funding, although that is with the caveat that it could at any moment be in your baseline. But it is intended to be recurrent funding, and that it is for CCGs to decide to what extent it is used for non-recurrent initiatives such as project management to get programmes going, and to what extent it is built recurrently in the plans that we develop and then present. In the GP Forward view, there is an expectation that was set out in the original framework that there is further funding next year. It is a more modest increase that is expected for next year, but we have every intention of having the conversations with the London team about how these plans develop over several years, not just seeing it as a one-off initiative. And I absolutely echo your thought about local ownership. I would expect every CCG to be wanting to see the delivery of this very significant piece of work through not just their primary care commissioning committees, but also at their full governing body. The reason that this funding is available is because nationally at London level, and certainly in our team, we believe that primary care is the foundation of what makes the health service great. If you get great primary care, then the rest of the system, if it doesn't just sort itself, it certainly goes a long way to addressing many of the issues that we and challenges that we face. So I'd be very surprised if people weren't, but yes, I'd advocate it if that's not the case.
Thank you, Lucy. David, are you No. Any further comments from around the table? Over to Health Watch and the public. I'm sorry, Sarah.
So I was going to say this is really, really positive for South West London. I think this is a real opportunity for us to transform primary care, but what I wouldn't underestimate is how big an ask this is and how this is going to be a significant change for primary care, and it's not easy. So we want to really, with the opportunity that we have with this extra money, really make inroads over the next 12 months, and I'm sure the GPs around the room would back me up. This is an opportunity for us, I think, in South West London, and we need to really grab it and make sure that we make the most of it.
Health Watch. Jamie?
Thank you. I would imagine the biggest barrier to extended access is sharing information, and I just wondered how much of this extra money is going to IT.
Lucy?
So that's a really interesting question. I think in terms of extended access, each service will have organised a process to ensure that, if necessary, there is the appropriate data sharing agreement in place. Going forward and looking at primary care at scale, the principles around both operating clinical models at scale and offering contracted models at scale may have some individual IG or data sharing challenges dependent on what models that each CCG chooses. But it's really important that they have the right safeguards and go through the right processes if there is indeed some data sharing requirement. In terms of IT specifically, one of the work streams within transforming primary care is the development of digital and online GP platforms, whether that's Skype or prescribing or email type conversations, and that is a process that we're going through in South West London to identify that, and actually has a separate and additional funding stream associated with it. But it is really important that whatever GP online system is selected for South West London is integrated within each CCG's primary care at scale plans and is not seen as something different and separate and add-on. Does that help?
Yeah.
Adrian?
Are you confident that there is the manpower to deliver it?
Do you mean GPs?
Yeah.
Oh, that's an excellent question. So there is also a workforce work stream in transforming primary care that does look at the very significant issues about retirement, recruitment and retention of not just GPs, but the primary care workforce. But the principle behind primary care at scale is that by delivering all the different elements of both a clinical model that operates at scale and a contractual model that allows practices to operate more flexibly and in a more resilient way together, that you get really significant improvements in GP work-life balance and in staff satisfaction. And there is some evidence, it's not very strong, and it's certainly not, not been around long enough for people to collate and write up in detail, but there is some evidence emerging from parts of the country where this operates already, that you do have GPs opting to remain in practice longer because they feel that the demands on them individually are not as great. But there are trade-offs involved in doing primary care at scale. So it is about each individual GP who is currently in the service and making sure that what we're building is a system that attracts and retains GPs of the future.
If I might just sort of add to that, I think it's just a general point. Of course, primary care at scale is not just about GPs, it's also about nurses, it's also about other healthcare professions such as pharmacists, and I think this is an exciting opportunity for us to look at expanding the range of skills that are available to patients, as well as supporting resilience for general practice as it currently is.
No further questions. We'll move to the recommendation, or the question. Does the CCG governing body agree with the recommended approach for apportioning funding across South West London CCGs? Could we have a hand from each CCG delegate, or so Wandsworth, Sutton, Richmond, Merton, Croydon, Kingston. Done. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, Lucy. We move now to item 4 on our agenda, developing a South West London individual funding requests, triage process and panel. Jonathan is going to present and Zali is here to support.
That wasn't me, so I don't know where their voice from afar was. Evening, everyone. I'm here to talk to you about individual funding requests panels, IFR panels as they are commonly known. And the proposal before you is a really simple one. It's about streamlining what we do across South West London. And it's really genuinely a quip because it will improve quality and consistency of services for patients at the same time as also saving us some money. For those of you who can recall, when we met in November, we agreed a policy, an effective commissioning initiative policy, and one of the consequences of that is a smaller group of patients will be going through the IFR panel process because they will be going through a prior approval process, which is a much more straightforward, simple process. IFRs, just as people can see and read in the paper, because it's explained there, they are for patients who have either a very rare clinical condition or are exceptional in some feature. And exceptionality is defined as a significant difference from the general population for the patient, or likely to gain significant more benefit from the intervention. So those are the two criteria that the panel currently undertakes. So the proposal is outlined in the box on page 1 is really just saying that the plan is to move to one triage panel process across South West London from the 3 triage panel processes we have at the moment, and to move to one formal IFR panel. The frequency of those is based on what we understand the workload to be at this point in time, but obviously as we move, subject to the agreement of the 6 CCGs today, to implementation, we'll keep that in mind, but it's currently proposed to be weekly triage panel processes and fortnightly full panel processes. Also, page 1 sets out very succinctly the benefits as we perceive. So there's greater consistency of decision making. Now we have one common ECI policy. That obviously helps with that, but also by having one panel making one set of decisions with one group of clinicians, I think that should add to a greater consistency. It should raise expertise because there will be a smaller group. Obviously, they will be supported by deputies as where appropriate, but a smaller group of individuals who will have expertise in this area rather than the current arrangements. It should reduce costs because by our reckoning, it removes or reduces from something like 24 meetings a month to 6 meetings a month. And there should be greater service resilience because we're able to draw on the range of people and the skills across South West London to ensure that these processes happen in a consistent and timely way, and indeed may happen in a quicker time frame for patients as a result. So that's the nature of the proposal. Page 3 sets out how the number of what we've defined as IFR cases, it's described as legitimate cases, and that really means patients who wouldn't go through the prior approval process I talked about a little earlier, and are not fertility cases. So they're under 100 a year now. And the bottom box sets out the costs associated with doing that, and that's part of the reason we want to streamline what we are doing through this process. And then it's probably worth also drawing attention, because when we were discussing this with CCGs as we prepared for this committee, people were asking, well, what happens next as we plan to mobilise this, and could we explain the operational implementation plan? So Zoli's kindly produced in Appendix 1 a proposal which sets out, subject to the agreement tonight, the next steps, which obviously involve appointing members of the panel, but also the necessary documentation to make it robust and clean, and successfully implemented, I think, by July is the timeline that we're working towards. So it's a really straightforward proposal, so I don't feel the need to talk about it at any greater length than I have. I'm very happy, I don't know if there's Ollie you wish anything else, and then very happy obviously to take any questions that representatives from the CCGs may have on this proposal.
Questions? Yes.
Hi. Yes, it's about the makeup when you're doing the operating plan, about who sits on the panel. Is it, as an independent funding review panel, is there a sense that you would have an independent chair structure so that facilitates somebody independent from the individual CCGs that are having the discussion? Because I thought there was some suggestion that you might have a clinical lead that rotates round and chairs, but I just wondered, being an independent panel, that there might be some benefit in looking at somebody outside of the CCGs to sit and chair that panel, you know.
So we're talking about individual funding requests. So I'm not sure we're talking about an entirely independent panel from because frankly that wouldn't necessarily have the local expertise and knowledge that people would have about the local needs of the population. One of the answers to the questions does set out what the proposed membership has been, and one of the things we've done is talk with the we have 3 workshops planned with the current IFR panels to check that we think the representation is right. All the early messaging is that it has been right. There are some interesting reflections that I guess we might want to consider as we move to the mobilisation. So, for example, in North West London, chairs of CCGs have rotated how the IFR panel runs and operates. I'm not suggesting that is the right solution, but there are some different options that we would want to work through. But that does set out clearly what the membership should be of an IFR panel, and as I say, there's been consistent support for what's set out from the current membership of the various IFR panels we have in place at the moment.
Yeah, and just a little to add that, as Jonathan mentioned, this sort of setup already works in North West London, it works in Kent, and North East London CSU, who supports the local delivery of this, provides the administration for this. So, for example, in Kent, they provide this service already, and they brought up the proposal to the CCGs that, look, this can work more effectively and build more resilience by having not just one pharmacist on the team or no public health consultant because they couldn't make it for a panel, but having a more resilient service where you could have 2 of them and they can bounce off each other about ideas and is it your interpretation of the evidence, etc. So it certainly will make the decision making more robust if someone is challenging from your specialty.
Thank you, Jonathan, for the paper. I was just looking, and it's more about the implementation side, when it's going to be monitored and managed by the directors of commissioning. And I think, again, we welcome the opportunity for the benefits that you've described. And I guess I wonder within that section whether that group would take some responsibility for monitoring the impact after the change. So if we're able to demonstrate that some of those elements such as timeliness of decisions and consistency of decision making, if there was a way for them to just make sure that what we are proposing delivers some of those anticipated benefits. And I just wondered if that was something that it might be worth considering for them to include within their remit.
Thanks, Fergus, for the question. I completely agree with you. We plan to evaluate at a 3-month point and a 6-month point as we implement this, the success of it. And you're quite right that those are some of the criteria we should use for it. I think there's also enhancements we want to have. So at the moment, I don't think we have annual reports coming out to individual CCGs on where they are with individual funding requests, and that's something that I think we would want to put in place, and directors of commissioning have already said they would find helpful. So yes, we'll do what you suggested, but in addition, I think there are some other benefits that we would want to see as a group and to be able to share and learn from.
Nicola.
Come in.
Sorry, just going back to what you just said. So, first of all, I'm just really hugely supportive of this. I think it's absolutely the right way to go. It makes an awful lot of sense to me. So 2 things really. One is, in the pool of people that you have, I think it's really important to get the balance between having a big enough pool of people so you've always got people to furnish the system, versus getting people who are experts and having a consistent approach, because when you kind of rotate chairing a bit, then you can end up with some variation. So the policy's got to be really tight and the training's got to be tight, and let's not make sure we have too few people in the system, because it's getting the balance right. And then secondly, just on the transition, so that's my biggest concern, because this has historically been quite difficult for patients getting through this entire system, and what we really don't want it to do is kind of get even temporarily worse before we get to better. So can we just, I know you'll be making every effort to make sure that the patients' cases aren't slowed down by this, but I think it's something to really take care of.
I completely agree. So on the first point, that's exactly the balance that we need to draw, and that's why we're having the workshops with the triage panels representatives at the moment, because clearly we want, where we can, to make efficiencies, but equally we have to be mindful that there's a patient at the end of this, and it's really important to get that balance right. So that's exactly what we'll be doing through the workshops and before we implement it. And to the second point, I mean, that's why we've got the sort of senior leadership and overview. That's why we've got a dedicated resource to this. We're planning to appoint a manager to oversee this on an ongoing basis. That's why we've got the project plan, and that's why directors of commissioning, which are a senior group, I would expect to be monitoring this to make sure we manage this transition safely. If there's an issue or a challenge early on, then we obviously have the option to default back to what is in place at this point in time, but that is not the plan. The plan is to move forward with this, and given the scale of some of the issues that people around this table are facing, we're talking about around 100 patients a year. We should be able to manage that well and smoothly through the processes that we've set out in this paper. I hope that's some reassurance.
Sorry, can I just add a small thing to that? I don't know whether it was part of your question, Nicola. So the triage panel and the IFR panel needs to follow each other. So the membership, it won't be one set of membership for the triage and one set of membership for the full panel, because once you work up the cases, that's when you build the knowledge, and so that needs to flow through. And that is, we want to preserve the good things that are happening, because it's already happening that we have a triage panel, and then following on after that there is a full panel, because they have discussed the case, they have all the information, and they can have a full decision afterwards. So we don't want to lose those, and those are the very lessons we want to learn from that.
Jonathan, has there been any communication with our member GPs about these proposals?
So the short answer is yes. So I wrote out, when we were proposing this, to all members of IFR panels, be they GPs or others, asking for their views, and we've collated those views and we've tried to structure a series of questions and answers in this paper in response to them. So that's the first check, as it were. The second check is the one I was describing earlier, which is the workshopping with the IFR panel. So I know Zolly went to the one that covers 4 of the 6 CCGs last week, and I think you went to Croydon, was it today or yesterday, to look at the processes that are in place there. So again, that will be a second opportunity for IFR panel members to put into the design of the solution. So both those things have happened.
And just but the GP population in general, are they aware of the changes? The IFR panels, yes, I know you've communicated with, but the other GPs, which are actually the members of our CCGs, who may not be aware of these changes are coming about, because I haven't seen any specific communications or heard it through medicines management.
So I think that's. Sorry, I misunderstood your question then, Les. So the short answer is we haven't made a decision yet. That's the purpose of the meeting today. If there is the decision, then it's clearly part of the mobilisation plan and the comms plan that we would communicate this. And we have a track record of doing this. This is what we did after the ECI policy was agreed back in November, and we would be adopting a similar approach to ensure that the wider GP membership was aware of what was proposed.
So I was just going to add in to what Jonathan said, is that it has been discussed at governing body level. As regards the GP, the wider GP population, what tends to happen is that they don't tend to, once the IFR process has been undertaken, they don't tend to get involved in that process. So there is feedback back to the GPs with any IFR panel, as well as to the patients on the decisions that have been taken. But the actual IFR process, whether it's been a local process or whether it's been proposed as a central process, would have no effect on the actual GP population themselves.
So that was my question, was will it look any different for GPs? I think I was wondering whether in the areas where there's only one borough currently, would it mean that they've got to do something different? That was my question leading on. I mean, we want to communicate with them, and hopefully what they'll see is an improved service and quicker responses, but will they actually notice the difference, or will they have to do anything differently?
Can I answer that? So there are 2 things in the current South West London IFR policy, and one thing is about who should be requesting the individual funding request. So the recommendation, and this is a nationally made recommendation, that it should be the treating clinician who should be requesting individual funding request. And this is based on that they know best what is the specific reason why they're asking for that information. GPs have a very important role to provide background information to usually secondary care clinicians to say what happened to the patient in the past, but it's the treating clinician who knows why this treatment would work so well for this patient, how that patient would benefit. So it's a hospitals who's supposed to be doing the individual funding request, and GPs should push it to the secondary care clinicians to do that, because they have a better chance of getting funding for the patient because they just know the case better. And the other part is that in terms of how the service is accessed by whoever is doing the applications is not changing. So we are changing of how we do the back office function, but the in route wouldn't necessarily change for things.
Thank you very much. In Appendix 2, on question 7, on the IFR panel, you have a lay member there. Is there any view as to what the role of the lay member is on the panel, and what is the and is there a view as to, we have a variety of lay members on our CCG boards, as to who would be a preferred lay member, and could they be the chair?
Just a quick. Does it have to be a lay member. It could be a
sorry, the lay member doesn't have to be a member of the governing body or anything else. It's just a lay member. I have, because I don't have the clearance to be on IFR panels. I don't know what input a lay member provides, but just as we have lay members to understand how systems work and give what is the patient view, that is what I presume they really represent in those discussions, because they won't necessarily know the technical evidence, etc., but they can provide a patient perspective.
Thank you. Yes, I mean, I am aware that there are lay members who are selected from members of the public on these groups, and my question was going to be, they will have developed some very unique skills, and how are they going to be integrated into one panel? Will they be taking turns, or how will that? I'm concerned that those skills could be lost. They provide a unique role in that they look at each individual case from a very different perspective from the clinicians in the room.
So there's no intention to lose that skill, and that's, as I say, why we're holding the series of workshops to work out how we draw on those expertise to the best of our capabilities. So there's something about how it's back really to Nicola's earlier question of how we retain the expertise and the depth of this, and actually greater resilience, because you've got a greater pool of people to draw from, at the same time as trying to make this process as efficient as possible. So that's why we've talked to people about what they think should be the membership. That's set out here. There would be then a process for, once we've run the workshops and agreed that this is the final set of arrangements, for making sure that we draw on those skills and appoint the right people going forward. So that is the plan. I can't promise, given we're running with 24 meetings at the moment and we're moving to 6, and there is an efficiency drive, that everyone involved at the moment will be involved going forward. But nonetheless, we would want to seek to ensure those skills, those really valuable skills, as you mentioned, Claire, aren't lost across South West London. In fact, are drawn upon. And as I say, it might actually make a more resilient service. So when you can suddenly find the lay member isn't able to be there because of leave or sickness or something, then there is somebody else who can fill that space, and the decision is made in a more timely way for the patient. So that's, and actually there's a peer support opportunity as well that may not have been there before too.
Thank you. Sorry to go back to the previous discussion regarding GP membership, but I sort of feel we were maybe missing a bit there, just in terms of, why we're here making a decision about this, because, the IFR process has been one that GP members have complained about for many, many years, and it hasn't been really very effective, and we think it could be done better. And that was very much brought to the table by our clinical leads from our localities, our board GPs, when our governing body discussed this. So that's why I'm hugely supportive of a change in this process, which I'm optimistic will really make a difference. But I think it's really important to say that, GP membership, I think, would very much support this. And if we make a decision on this today, then we'll do the comms around it, which will say to GPs, look, the system is changing. They might not want to know all the detail about it, but actually what we want now is feedback about the new system to make sure it is really doing what we want it to do.
Thank you. Just for clarification, really, does this mean there's a central budget for IFR cases, or will each CCG meet the cost of the treatment?
For Jonathan.
So there's two elements. There's the sort of, which I'll answer the bit that I don't think you're asking about first, which is the sort of, but then I'll answer the other bit, which is the administrative. But there are two bits, just to be clear. The first bit is the administration of this, and that is set out in this paper, and that does come from individual CCGs, but that is often there's two elements to that actually. There's the element that's provided by the commissioning support unit, which is pooled across South West London, and then there is the element which is drawn from individual clinicians. I think your question is actually about who pays for the treatments through the individual funding request, and they are back with and remain the responsibility of the individual CCG, the sovereign governing body who's made that decision. So there are two elements to it. Hopefully I've covered both.
Sarah.
Just to add that to that though, but what we might want to consider going forward is where we do have low volumes and high cost, we might want to consider across South West London whether we do pooling arrangements and risk share for that, because what that then does is provide some financial resilience to individual CCGs, because those problems move around and often that is a better way of doing it. So at the moment it goes back to individual CCGs, but it might be something that we want to consider for the future, but certainly at this point that's not the proposal, but that might well be a way of managing the money in a way that makes sense for all the CCGs in the future.
Anything else from Health Watch or the public reps? The committee in common is asked to agree to the proposal outlined. Do we so agree? Wandsworth, Sutton, Richmond, Merton, Croydon, Kingston. Thank you very much. Completed our agenda. We are now open to public questions, and unless I'm blind, I don't see any members of the public here. And we have had no written questions. Is there any other business? Although I asked earlier. Therefore, we adjourn the meeting. Thank you very much.